Dr. Peter Bouteneff, how are you doing?
I am delighted to be here. That's a lot of how I'm doing right now. It's great to see you. It always is.
Yeah, likewise. Uh, we have we have a big project that we did together. How Sweet the Sound, and there's a website, howsweetthesound.net, if folks want to check that out. And Peter was one of two presenters to sort of contextualize the music. The other presenter was Father Moses Berry, and it was a quite momentous and sort of one of a kind of experience. One that I still, pinch myself like, did that really happen? And it was really one of those things. And you and Moses were so the context for the music. I was really struggling. I was so hard struggling, trying to fight back tears, and then I was like, okay, now it's time to go. It's time to walk up on the stage. And it took me a few minutes to compose myself to get started. But
I remember that.
I really appreciated your words, and I just resonated deeply with what you were saying.
I mean, it's so touching. You say we did it together. I mean, Sean, this was your composition, and you did get some support, I know, from people who believed in you, and I was very honored to be asked to be involved, and flew down to Columbus in a shot. The moment I caught wind of the spirit and the beauty of this project, and all I could do is just kind of add some reflections. This was your baby. It was God's baby, but you were the midwife. I don't know what the metaphor would be here, but you really, it was beautiful. I'm happy to talk as long as you would like about that subject, because that was that changed me in a lot of ways, I would say, that day.
Wow. So I sent you some scores. I think didn't I send you some scores?
I don't think you did, to be honest with you. I don't remember having a sense of the sonic landscape that I was going to catch. And I remember walking into the room during a kind of a final run through of some of what was happening. And I was immediately, I stopped in my tracks, because the moment I heard what was going on, all of the sensibilities in me as a musician, as an Orthodox Christian, as an aficionado of a wide diversity of styles of music, it felt like it just came together, like in a snap, to me, what you were aiming to do, and the strength of it and the success of it, to me, was instantaneous. It's like, and for that to happen, so much effort and love and experience on your part had to go into it, because with great art, if I may call it that, and I do, it can go one of two ways. You can either need a whole lot of time to kind of drink it in and get into it, and see, that's what he's trying to do. That can happen with incredibly great art, and by art I mean music, architecture, visual arts, dance, anything. But in this case, it's like, aha, I see. Oh my Lord. how sweet the sound. And so the remarks that I prepared were prepared on the basis of concept, not of experience. And then, once I heard that kind of sound check and realized where this was going to go, I could really speak with all that much more conviction. And I was also very, very moved. So yeah.
Yeah. Well,
It's like great.
thank you for being a part. It was great. And so you're an interesting character. You have some. So you're a jazz musician.
Yes.
And you're a professor. You're a theologian, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you're Orthodox. One thing about my journey is it seems like I have collected, in one sense, a lot of things that don't seem to go together. And my life is about trying to figure out how to integrate these different things. In one way I feel like I identify with you is with a lot of the different things that you're passionate about and that you do very well. And and how is it possible to balance all of these things, and how is it possible to sort of integrate these things, in a meaningful way? So if you could kind of talk a little bit about your upbringing and maybe when a lot of these pieces started to come clearer, and then maybe ways that you, I don't know, maybe began to be able to coexist with all these different pieces.
Yeah. When you started describing your own life and kind of trying to integrate different sides that don't seem to go together, I suppose that describes my life too. But I suppose because it's all coming from one me, it doesn't feel that disintegrated. It just is like, this is Peter, and I suppose there's a part of me that still wonders how I got to be a theology person. I never wonder how and why I became a musician. That's just so natural. But, I sometimes wonder how I became a theology person. And then there's a lot of time where like I'm in the classroom and I'm teaching it, or I'm sitting there writing it, and it's as natural to me as walking through a jazz standard, which is very natural to me, very natural. I do it with my eyes closed and I disappear into the music. I know you know that feeling. And that can happen to me when I'm lecturing theology. In a way, that's the stranger thing for me. But I was, as the youngest of four, I'm 60 now. I still can't believe that. But I have an eldest brother who's 11 years older than me, and then another sister who's 9 years older, and another sister who's 4 years older. And so I'm the youngest. And I think by the time my parents had me, they cut me a lot of slack in the sense of freedom to sing. My brother became a doctor, so it's like, okay, the ambitions of kind of classic American success story. My parents were immigrants. It's like fulfilled in my brother Alex. And then two wonderfully talented sisters, and then me, and so I got to kind of be what I wanted to be in a way. I mean, everybody did what they wanted to do, but I think I was given a lot of liberty, and I'd say the other thing about my parents.
Thank you so much for watching my video so far. If you'd like to support, there are several ways to do so below. Also, likes are free. Please comment, share, and subscribe. Now back to the video.
My parents is that they were very cultured and very European. I mean, they'd grown up in poverty, essentially, and then worked their way up, and then they were impoverished again. By the time they got to the States, they were, my mother was cleaning houses and my father worked in a factory, and they ended up, building a great kind of middle-class American life out of that. Coming from ancestry that was like extremely privileged, so there's a lot of ups and downs in the longer history of my family. And I think as a result, my parents having lived through World War II in France and the immense upheaval of that, my parents kind of wore this all very lightly. And they were both deeply unpretentious people, who had reason to be pretentious, if you would, because they were both, amazing, coming from amazing backgrounds. So, and I would also say that in my wider family, there were a lot of people who were pursuing what they wanted to do and doing it really excellently. An uncle who has won an Oscar for his work in computer technology and in cinematic animation, cousins who, married world-class poets. I mean, it's like the family's like, it's like, wow, we were all encouraged to kind of excel, but without the kind of gun to the head pressure of excelling. And so I've sort of never told my story in this way as I'm telling it to you right now. So I thank you for the kind of the leeway you're giving me to just talk about it. But I think I'm describing to you the kind of the bedrock that that I'm grateful to God for every day, that allowed me, I mean, also just the privileged situation in which I grew up, economically and otherwise. The struggles that I faced in my life have not been financial or socioeconomic. They've been other of other nature. But so all of that has truly helped me to feel free to combine seemingly incongruous things. I could say more, but jump in.
Yeah. No.
Yeah.
That's great. So you said that maybe it's hard to like it's more surprising to you that being a theologian, you being a theologian, than you being a musician. Can you talk about some of your earliest experiences with music?
Legend had it that when I was still like in the in the crib, like just learning to stand, I was differentiating between Beethoven and Brahms. That's a legend, I think. It's like Paul Bunyan, or something of music. But no, I guess I did have a kind of a natural ear for music, and so that's always been there. And then later, when fast forwarding to the conservatory years, like the program I was in was very ear centric. It was ear training. It was like we'd do exercises of identifying intervals, and then you'd have to identify, okay, that was a minor chord in the first inversion, and then a minor sixth above that, you're playing a major chord in second inversion. I'd have to be able to like identify that. And that was like really, really hard work. And, I can't really do that right now. But, I guess I did have a natural inclination. It's like just things fit ear-wise. And I think for me, the ear and the sound and the harmony have always taken precedence over virtuosic speed. I've never been an extraordinarily fast player in anything that I play, and I'm mostly a bass player. But I do have good feel, and I do choose really good notes when I'm walking, a bass line. But yeah, I think the earliest experiences with music were like a lot of kids growing up, in regular school, there'd be some kind of music going on or some kind of choir or whatever. It never impressed me too much. From pretty early on, I was singing in church choirs. I grew up Orthodox, going to church either in a place where it was all church Slavonic, like a Russian service, or it was in English, but with kind of Western Russian melodies, and so that tonality of Orthodoxy is deeply ingrained in my system, for sure. And jazz kind of grew out of, like in high school, I was listening mostly to rock, but my friends were, began introducing me to things like, well, for one, progressive rock, so Yes, Genesis, all those guys. And then through that, discovering Jeff Beck, where you have jazz influence. And then Herbie Hancock, oh my God, it's like discovering like, Headhunter's Thrust, Man-Child, so all of a sudden jazz is like exploding. And then out of that, I found more kind of trad jazz, I kind of in a way worked backwards from fusion back through Miles and and then, discovering kind of more and more trad stuff. And then still today, just embracing all of that completely.
Now, it's interesting. So, in a lot of ways, I have found in my journey. So, I'm a convert to Orthodoxy. And I grew up in a household that where they definitely Christian values were observed, though my dad was not a Christian. I catch him praying every once in a while, and I always tease him. So who are you praying to? What are you praying? But I catch him praying quite often. But he's a theist. He's just not a Christian.
Sure.
And my mom was more or less the Christian leader in the household, so she took us to church, and it was non-denominational kind of word of faith, Pentecostal, and I always joke about terms like interdenominational or non-denominational, because those are terms that those are denominations that just happen to have those very confusing names, seeming to be convincing of what they actually are not. But it was I got to a certain age, I started asking a lot of questions, and a lot of the questions that I was asking were not sort of being answered with a sort of the answers weren't as thorough as I thought that they should be. And that kind of led me to ask more questions, and then and I got into Christian apologetics and folks like Josh McDowell and and I'm going to say this: there's been this big scandal in the sort of evangelical Christian world because after Ravi Zacharias passed away, they discovered that he was doing a lot of stuff, a lot of really significant stuff that RZIM is going to change its name because they don't want to be associated with the founder.
Yeah.
Like stuff like that. Really
sure.
heavy stuff. I'm not going to go into detail, but people like Ravi, people like William Lane Craig, and then of course C.S. Lewis and G.K. Chesterton and Malcolm Muggeridge and a lot of folks that Ravi introduced me to, and then just things started, and I found myself in a situation where I had some bad experiences. A lot of the answers that I was getting still were not satisfying some of the sort of historical continuity questions that I had. And a buddy of mine, a guy that I actually do a show with every other week. His name's TK Coleman. The name of the show is Thunder and TK. He started sending me these articles because he himself had discovered the Orthodox Church and he was investigating it. And so he started sending me these articles, and it was like right on time because it was right at a period where I was having significant issues questioning a lot of stuff. I was working at a church where the pastor was really abusing his authority. It was a kind of an impoverished congregation where he was living in a mansion, and the church had bought him an $85,000 BMW and also a Corvette. I found out later that the church had bought his 16-year-old daughter for Sweet 16 a Hummer, and he was trying to get them to buy him a jet because he couldn't be inconvenienced by doing what everybody else does by going to the airport. So I took that job in duress because I had left another church. It was time to move on, and I was in need of something. I was looking for something, and I actually went into this church because I actually wanted some counseling. I came in. I was like, "Look, man, I'm here are some things that have happened to me, and I'm I just need to talk this out." And they offered me a job like on the spot. And I needed the money. So I took the job. And it was like a part-time band director position. But it was during my time at that church that I became wide open to what it was that I was doing was the wrong direction. It was the wrong thing. And so when my friend sent me those articles, it was like perfectly timed. It was amazingly perfectly timed. And they just answered all of these questions that I had. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is like, could this be the case? And so, I'm the type of person that if I'm either all in or I'm not dealing with it at all. That's just the kind of person I am.
Mm-hmm.
And so once I knew that this was the true church, that this was the answer, this was what I was looking for my whole life, then I was like, well, that's what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And so it didn't take very long. I met with some priests at the church that I go to. One actually was the priest of my marriage, my wedding, Father Dan Rentel.
Oh yeah, I know him well. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, and
wonderful.
I had great conversations with him
Mm-hmm.
and the other priest that worked there, and it was pretty quick. But he knew I was serious,
Mm-hmm.
and so they received me in. So it was really interesting because I had just taken the job at Ohio State, and in the middle of that, I was also converting to Orthodoxy.
Wow.
And so when I, so in 2004, that's when I took the job at Ohio State, and that December, that's when I was received into the church.
It's a lot of transition at once. Yeah. A lot of.
Yeah. And, I had been playing music in church for years, been playing, gospel music and everything for a long time. It was a big part of sort of my kind of musical palette, or whatever you want to call it. It was just part of my musical experience. But I also needed to sort of detox. And so for 3 years, I just sat down. I went to church. I just did, I fasted when they told me to fast. I ate what they told me to eat. And I did, and it was very healing and rejuvenating. And I remember the first time I took communion, I felt a quickening. It was like something happened to me. I was like, oh no. And it was enough to sustain me. Now, meanwhile, I mean, this is not really supposed to be a story about me.
I'm happy to listen.
but meanwhile, shortly after that, so I'm in my second marriage, and the first marriage ended right around the same time. So in, I'd say 2005, the summer of 2005, she split. Wasn't my choice, but hey, she did me a favor. That's the way I try to contextualize it. And, and I had a lot of conversations with Father Dan and with everyone. It's like, is this going to affect things? Because I wanted to be doing things right. And they were like, well, she kind of left you. That wasn't really your deal. And so that was like the spiritual journey. All that stuff is happening. But the music was always there the whole time, right?
Yeah.
So the music is traveling with me through a lot of transitions, a lot of different things. It's been kind of the one constant thing in my life since I was 6 when I started. And so the desire to try to combine these things that seem to be totally sort of disparate and not related was pretty strong. So right from the beginning, I wanted to try to combine those things if possible, but respectfully, because I love tradition and I love the music in the church that I attend. I love the history. I'm fine with a cappella music. I'm fine with that. There's a beauty. I sense the Spirit strong in that music. So that's not. It was never like let me try to improve something. It wasn't about that.
Sure. Yeah. It
was more like, here are these things that seem to. They're trying to come together, and I can't stop fighting them to come together. And so that's kind of how that happened. What I want to ask you about.
Can I ask one thing on the way?
Oh, sure.
Part of your story, which is so interesting, like on what I love and recognize so much in you, there's a spirit of recognition in me of wanting to bring things together in a way, and being undaunted in that task. And it's especially impressive because, as you well know, the Orthodox Church, part of its beauty is that it's traditional and
absolutely,
and doesn't change quickly.
That's right.
But as a result, sometimes in places where it fully can change and fully can evolve, it's resistant. And so what I mean is like, just I can imagine that, you know, whereas I walked into the room and heard your adaptation of the Vespers, and it's like, oh yeah, I get it and I love it. I think there would be a lot of sensibilities that would shut down and say, no, this doesn't work because it's not Greek. This doesn't work because it's not Slavic. It doesn't work because it's not the culture that I know. And so how have you, I can't even say past, like how have you been, or have you been facing that kind of
you know, I've not received any sort of pushback.
Oh, good.
Like you took this too far, and I went on Father Thomas Soroka's his show, and I mean, I received a lot of emails after that with people just encouraging it. Lovely. The one somewhat critical comment that someone made was right after the event, and the comment was not about the music. It was about the volume.
Okay.
Someone, it was just too loud, and or they were having trouble hearing an aspect or a component of the music, and that venue was not ideal acoustically.
Mm-hmm.
But that was the only sort of negative thing. Now, I'm going to say this too, though. I think part of I'm an introvert, and that's often the benefit of being an introvert is if you really if you're really intense about something, you can sort of not be aware of a certain sort of negativity that someone may experience. And so I'm introverted, but then I'm also busy. So I think that's also can be a positive thing. If you're going to be sort of messing around with sacred cows, then it might be a good thing to have some other things that you can do also.
Don't give up your day job, man.
Right. Right.
Yeah, but no, I get it. It's not just a kind of practical thing, but yeah, just not to put all of your creative and emotional energy in one place. Is that what you mean by be doing other things?
It's interesting because I think one thing I sometimes have challenges with is I will try to put all of myself into everything, and that can create a problem, you know. And the way I've tried to deal with this and tried to balance this out is to I try not to carry baggage with me. So I try to travel light. So I have all of this stuff that I'm doing, but so when I'm teaching a lesson, for instance, I'm only thinking about the lesson. When I'm teaching a class, I'm only thinking about teaching the class. When I'm having this conversation with you right now, I'm only thinking about having this conversation with you. I try to stay fully present in the moment. And what that actually does, and this is not intuitively obvious, but what it actually does is it gives you a break from the other stuff that you do.
Right.
Because you're not carrying it with you.
Yeah, that's great.
And I've had to, I've learned how to, use my calendar to help me. So the problem with doing something like what I'm suggesting is if there's not a lot of detail on your calendar, then what'll happen is you'll have a hard time really being fully present because you'll constantly be wondering, have I been here too long? Like,
Yeah.
is there something else that I need to be doing?
Right.
You'll be kind of doing that. And I was doing that a lot at one point, and I was like, that's not what I want to be doing. So yeah, I mean, so I try to travel light.
Yeah, that's wonderful. It's wonderful. I'm a fellow introvert as well, but I'm also learning that introverts have different. I mean, there's more than just introvert, extrovert. There's all kinds of different things. I don't know if you buy into the whole Myers-Briggs and thing, but it is interesting as far as it goes. But yeah, I can relate very well to that intensity of doing what one is doing right there. And then, as much as you and I probably have a hard time with lengthy exposure to crowds or with small talk and things like that, I think you and I flourish, don't we, when we're just like talking with each other about the stuff that matters in life, You have a show with how many, 140, 150 episodes of talking with people intensely. I've just started my own podcast, and you were my guest a couple of weeks ago, and we're going to air that in June. And I'm enjoying that project immensely. As an introvert, it's an occasion to just dig deep into one person, and not just talk about stupid shit.
Yeah, right, exactly. And I'll tell you that stupid stuff, man. I that's like my kryptonite. It is really, really hard for me to engage in just trivial, drivel. Like you go to, I use this analogy often. So if I go to a mixer, and I don't know anybody, 1 hour of a mixer would require several days of sleep.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not because I don't like people, because I love people.
Sure.
It's that I don't want to have to fight for attention. It's the fighting for attention, that initial engagement, that takes all of my energy. I don't have any. I can't do that for very long. I really suffer.
Yeah.
if I try to engage in, oh, hey, what's the weather like? And this is, just that kind of stuff. What happens to me with the weather thing is I'll talk about the weather, but then I'm going to want to talk about the science of the weather, what actually causes the weather,
yeah.
And how the weather is different in different areas of the world,
mm-hmm.
and why, the southern hemisphere, why the weather patterns tend to move the opposite direction. See, that's the kind of stuff that
absolutely.
I want to be talking about. But that immediately goes way too deep for most people that you just meet.
Mm-hmm.
And you can scare people away like that. And I've done that.
Mm-hmm.
So now I've just learned to wait for people to say something to me, which seems like, that can come across like you're standoffish or, or you're not interested or something like that. No, it's not that at all. It's just, I just don't have the capacity to, I can't do the things that necessary to get your attention.
Right.
I can't do that for very long.
Right.
Yeah. And it's interesting because, we're both introverts, which a lot of musicians are introverts.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that I've seen frequently is it's like folks, they're amazed or they're puzzled by that I'm a teacher. Like I'm standing in front of a classroom and a performer, right? I'm standing, on stage playing for hundreds or thousands of people or whatever it is. That I am, I have a podcast, that I can have these kind of conversations. People see me in this context and like, wait, he likes to talk.
Right.
That isn't that isn't the issue. It's not the talking part.
Yeah.
It's in all of those situations, they're like controlled environments, right?
Yep.
So
yep.
You're talking to a class, you're talking to them about a specific topic that they came there to hear.
Yes, they want to hear you. They've given you that space that you need to actually enter in, right, and say something. I mean, a lot of stand-up comedians are introverts too, and that surprises a lot of people because people think introverts are all shy, that they're scared to speak in public, whatever. No, no, they just don't want to, be in an empty conversation where their input isn't actually desired and can't be handled or whatever. But, it's very interesting. Yeah. It's, teaching, performing, like I'm not afraid of public speaking. I've spoken in front of large audiences and, not a bead of sweat, especially if I'm prepared. That helps. No, but, seriously, that's easy. A conversation about the weather is hard.
Oh my goodness, it's hard.
In a crowd where the person doesn't really care. It's like, don't waste my time.
At one point, okay, so I was in. Okay, I had just finished high school, and I didn't want to go to college. I was like, I'm not going to college. I don't want to go to college, and I really didn't. I didn't. The family that I that I am part of, that's not really an option. Like you're going to do something,
Yeah.
And so, I just practiced. I practiced like 8 hours a day, and I was writing music and performing and stuff like that. But I remember, I can't remember what it was, getting connected with someone, and they were like, "Hey, why don't you come and check this out?" And back in these days, so this would have been because I graduated from high school in '93, so this would have been maybe 94, 95 in that range of time.
Mm-hmm.
And this guy, a friend of mine, he says, "Hey, come with me. There's they used to make these knockoff colognes. Nothing illegal,
right?
But they were like these knockoff colognes, and we would have these meetings with like a lead salesman that was basically teaching us how to go and sell the cologne." And I just remember, because it's like basically it's like you're going and you're talking to complete strangers, about this thing, and I'm an introvert, right? And so I'm like, but at least I had a mission, though. Okay, I'm trying to sell this,
right?
So at least I had something to focus on. But that was totally like, I'm not a salesman. That's not what I have. But I was like, maybe this would be a good skill for me to have. And so I was like, okay. So I pursued this thing for, I don't know, it was a couple weeks. I burned out hard.
Sure.
I mean, they had us like wearing suits and stuff and to go and talk to people about cologne. It was some different stuff. So I remember I did that, and see, I was remembering another thing. And when and this must have been when I was 19, and the girl that I was dating, she broke up with me right? So she went to college. We graduated together. She went to college, and I was at home practicing all day. And her family never really dug me anyway. And I, it was kind of disheartening too, because at that time I was on the Phil Donahue show. I was on BET, Jazz Central. I had released my fourth, record, my fourth CD, and I'm playing all over the place and I'm doing all this stuff. And her mother in particular just never dug me. I couldn't even get her to watch me on TV. Like it was just like terrible, So anyhow, so the girl breaks up with me, and it was a really traumatic thing. I remember losing a lot of weight really quickly and just not having an appetite. It was just kind of rough. So for a couple of weeks, it was really rough. And it was at that moment that I was like, man, maybe I'm basing my sense of value on the wrong stuff. And so I was like, okay, let me try this Jesus thing. Like really try it, because I grew up a certain way, but I hadn't really prioritized that. So I was like, okay, let me make this a real thing. So like I said, when I dive in, I dive all the way in. And so it was a matter of weeks, and I had talked to all of my close friends, and I converted all of them. So we were like, hey, we got to do something. The Bible says we're supposed to preach the gospel, be instant in season and out of season, and all of this, he that wins souls is wise, like this. And I was like, oh man, I got to get out here. So we started a street evangelism ministry. So we're on street corners, we're talking, and remember, I'm an introvert. So we're on street corners and we're talking to folks about and I remember my favorite question was, what do you think about the Bible? Right? So I would just ask that question. Now, we used to have these 4 spiritual law tracks. We would go to Pinball Pete's. This is this pinball place on Michigan State campus. We got kicked out of there. So we figured out we could do it on the street corner. And it's interesting. What's interesting is if you have a reason, what you'll be willing to do, if you really have a reason,
Right.
Like none of that stuff was, I'm an introvert and I don't have sales is not my thing and none of that, but it just seemed like a natural thing to do that. And I didn't even consider that maybe my personality type and I wouldn't be suited for it.
Right.
But that's kind of been how things have progressed for me in pretty much everything. I jump in real deep. I make a lot of mistakes. Then I find out later that most of the stuff that I said was probably heresy. And that I keep.
Yeah, well, you just got to keep getting back up. Like I think it's a Desert Father story where somebody comes to a monastery and says, what do you guys do here all day? And he said, we fall and we get back up again.
Oh,
all day. Nobody said the journey is like, hey, mistake free. It's like constant mistakes. But I was thinking, like when you're selling knockoff cologne, or if you're selling Jesus, and what unites those two as the introvert nightmare for me is that you're talking to people who don't really want to be listening. It's
exactly.
It's one thing like, to stand in a classroom where like they're there because they want to be there and they want to hear what you have to say. But nobody wants to be sold something.
No.
Whether
it's interesting. My whole approach to talking to people about spiritual things because I feel very conflicted sometimes working for a state university, a state institution where you're not really allowed to sort of tell people the real answers, if you
Sure.
understand what I mean.
Sure. Yeah.
But you have to sort of, you know, rather than talking about prayer, you talk about meditation. Rather
Yep.
than talking about, you have to you come up with this stuff, and I don't have to hide my faith, but it's yeah,
That's very
it's
delicate. Yeah.
it is very delicate, and it's very challenging. But my approach has become, I'm not really going to bring any of that up
Hmm.
until you say something to me.
Right.
Now,
Right.
ask me a direct question, then I'm going to give you the answer.
Yeah. Absolutely.
The answer as I understand it. That's how it's going to be. And I found that although maybe I haven't interacted with as many people, the people that I've interacted with actually were impacted by the conversation.
Beautiful. Mm. It doesn't surprise me in your case. That's lovely. That's lovely. But yeah, I have a very similar philosophy, unless asked, I don't go there. Um, I, before COVID hit, I don't, I can't be both a regularly gigging musician and a professor. I'm a full-time theology professor, but I would attend this weekly session that was a kind of an open jam, like musicians would show up of generally a very high caliber. New York is New York, and I would go just to kind of keep that part of my life alive, keep that oil flowing through me, of improvised music, both listening and playing with people that I either know or don't know, or a combination thereof. And so I was doing that for many years, and they all know what my day job is. That I teach at a seminary. I teach theology, Christian theology, Orthodox Christian theology. It's like,
Yeah.
and people have a real sticky radar for that kind of thing. And so all the more important, for me to kind of wear it very lightly, which is kind of comes naturally to me. It's not like I walk into the club and like I'm just like dying to talk theology and, oh, too bad nobody wants to. That's the last thing on my mind. Jesus is on my mind, but theology as such is not. Nor do I want to talk to anybody about it. But on a few rare occasions, later in the night when almost everybody's gone, somebody's kind of deliberately, hung back and wanted to ask me some questions. And I always find that so moving when that happens. Like, you actually want to hear about it, Wow. And I've had some really lovely conversations, at 1 a.m. in a bar.
Now, this whole thing sort of begs a certain question. So there is, okay, so pop culture, popular music, pop Christianity, the sort of reducing the standard, like kind of making it easier, telling people that, anybody can do this. It'll be easy. Just try. A lot of the things that you hear today, they're not they're not very deep. They're very shallow,
Mm-hmm.
And having like a foot in something that is as deep as Orthodoxy, and as deep as jazz is, and so then realizing how deep things actually can be, but having to sort of be on the surface, and see how people are usually communicated to. So it's like there's these different philosophies. This one that we were talking about, wait until people ask you,
Mm-hmm.
and then give them the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
Or nobody's asking for this, but dumb stuff down so much so that though they haven't actually really made a commitment to anything, they will be in some way interacting with it, not maybe not of their own free will, but sort of, they're rubbing up against it and they don't recognize what it is. They don't realize
Mm-hmm.
what it is that they're interacting with, that they're interfacing with, Jazz has this, in my experience, I think there's an aspect of my searching in jazz that is also fulfilled by Orthodoxy, or that seems to be compatible with, congruent with this sort of seeking, kind of thing. But I think that it's misunderstood. Frequently I have students, they want to do a music degree, and particularly they want to do a jazz degree because, they think they're going to improvise their way through the curriculum. And and I frequently tell my students, I teach improvisation sequence. I say, the class is called improvisation, but you will not be improvising your way through this class, because actually what creates spontaneity is preparation. That's what facilitates it.
Absolutely.
Right? So to the extent that you really understand and know the form, that's what gives you the liberty and liberates your ability to say all that you want to say. But you have to know it's there. You have to know all of what's there.
Right.
And there's all this it's like this exhaustive, collection of recordings, and and there's just all this stuff to research and to know, to be able to actually say something and to be able to think that you're even saying something new. I mean, how do you know that you're saying something new, right? So there's something that, to me, that seems to be in common with that, with the whole Orthodox, my journey in Orthodoxy. What do you think of that?
Oh God, that raises a lot of very deep and beautiful things. I remember the first inkling I had of what you're talking about. I was living in Boston. I was a student at New England Conservatory, and it's probably 1980. And there was like a gig, just kind of, it was like somebody, rumor had it that Pat Metheny was in town and he wanted to just do a gig at Riles. And he got Charlie Hayden and Jack DeJohnette, and it was a trio. And like, that's the kind of thing that, like, Boston, you got Berkeley, you got NEC, you got all these like jazz schools, you got all these jazz people, and like people would have just killed to see that concert. And it's like, just happened to hear like the rumor, and got to go. Not only that, but I found out where Charlie Hayden was staying, and I had the nerve to call him and ask him if he'd have dinner with me before the gig. If I had like one favorite bass player at that time, it was him. And I had dinner with Charlie Hayden, and then we went to Riles, and I heard them do sound check, and then I heard like this outrageously creative trio gig of three musicians of very different ilk. I mean, you know Jack DeJohnette, you know Charlie Hayden, you know Pat Metheny. Charlie and Pat have since then forged a history together. But and I remember, like, in the break, all this is leading to this one thing that Jack DeJohnette said, because, you know, they played a set, and you know how Jack plays. It's unbelievably free, and yet you know exactly where the time is. And some kid asked Jack DeJohnette in these words, "How do you play so free?" And Jack DeJohnette said, "It takes a ton of discipline." It's like all of us were schooled at that moment by what he said. It takes a ton of discipline. And so, like what you were just talking about, that it reminded me immediately of that moment. And then just another kind of place I'll go in my history is I spent a couple of years living in Japan, just because, again, I told you, like, my family was like allowing me to do all kinds of crazy stuff, you know. So I went and lived in Japan for a couple of years. I taught English, and I went to the Orthodox Church in Japan every week, you know, by the way. But I studied tea ceremony there for 2 years. Talk about discipline, you know. It's a very, very ritualized thing. I read a bunch of kind of Zen stuff about Zen, about painting, about martial arts, and what I gleaned from all of that over those years was that Japan was one of the most structured and ritualized societies I'd ever experienced. There are things that you have to say at every moment of the day. There's things you say when you get up in the morning. There's things you say when you leave the house. There's something you say when you come back to the house. There's something you say before a meal. There's something you say after a meal. Nothing religious about it, but it is ritualized. And I thought, you know, gee, I came to this country because of this unbelievably free-spirited art that I see, you know. And then the penny dropped again over the course of 2 years. It's like, it's the structure and the ritual that gives you the substrate from which you can be free.
Yeah.
Because there's no freedom that is baseless, you know. Everything has to be embodied. Even the spiritual has to be embodied in something, ultimately into physical things, you know. And so it's rituals that, in different ways, in different cultures and in different lives, ironically, it's the ritual that gives us freedom. It's stability that gives you freedom. It's structure that gives you freedom. And it's all a balance of the two, you know, because if you fetishize the structure, if that's all you're living for, you're missing something. Yeah. But if everything is all the time, you know, that's pointless, you know. Yeah. So it's finding that combination, and they're mutually dependent, it seems to me.
Yeah, you know, there's a similar this one of my favorite now by the way, that you must prepare for spontaneity. That comes from a pastor, former pastor of mine, when I was in college, Joel Brooks, Pastor Joel Brooks, and I interviewed him also. Such an important figure in my spiritual development, and he's a good friend. But he is chock full of those kinds of gems. One of my favorite whipping boys along the same path is this, you know, outside of the box. You know, people talk about that frequently. Oh, you know, I'm an outside of the box thinker, you know, this kind of thing. And so it's a contradiction in terms. So there's a problem with this statement. Okay. And part of the way that you can know that there's a problem with the statement is the way the term is used to characterize musicians that were not outside of the box, right? They characterize them as outside of the box because they don't recognize the actual size of the box, right? The box is much bigger than they thought it was, right? But as I was suggesting before, when you really know the form of something, it facilitates all kinds of manipulations that could not occur to you unless you really understand the full extremities of the, like the outside of the entire form. What the actual measurements are, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The actual size of the structure in detail of what you're talking about. Usually what it is that people are way in the middle of what the actual box is. And so then when they discover something that's a little bit outside of what their own perception was, then now they're outside of the box. No, you're not outside of the box. You're still inside the box. Frequently players like Thelonious Monk, he's outside of the box. Now, his box is bigger than most of our boxes. That's true. But he's still inside of a box. And evidence that he believed that he must fully discover what was inside the box, the actual box, is that he spent all of these years sounding like Bud Powell.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
And you can say that, there's this tradition of transcription in a transcribing artist and using their sort of vocabulary to develop not just your understanding, but also there's a technical aspect of just being able to play your instrument. Not just in what we usually classify as technical, but also stuff like feel, energy, like all of that kind of stuff. We usually don't call that stuff technical. We don't, often is the case that we don't use the term technical to describe music feel.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But actually there is a technique that will allow you to access a good feel. So it's really, it's interesting. We use a lot of different words, and I think some of the words are deliberately used to continue a certain mystique and to maybe make us think that it'll be easier for us to be inspired, because we're surprised by something. I remember, and this happens frequently, my wife will often leave $1, $5, $20, whatever it is, in her pants, or in a shirt pocket or something. And every once in a while she will find it after having done some laundry. And she always says, when she finds the money, she always says, "Go, Jesus."
That's lovely.
And yes, go, Jesus. That is true. That is true. It is nice that you didn't lose the money.
Mm-hmm.
But in another sense, the money was there, right? I mean, you put the money there, right?
Mm-hmm.
You just forgot where the money was. So it just seems, it seems sometimes we create scenarios intentionally, unintentionally, sorry. We create these scenarios so that we can be surprised in that can create a certain sense of awe or something.
Yeah.
It's a kind of a strange
there. Yeah. Yeah. That's lovely. some of what you said too about teaching improvisation. I recently read a quote from Miles Davis. I think it goes something like, "Takes a long time to sound like yourself."
That's right.
And I think people come into improvised music. I'm going to play my own style. I'm going to be my own style. Again, like if you think of any of the Japanese arts, it's like if your art is sushi, the first 10 years you're just like washing rice, right? Then you start being allowed to form the rice into a cakes, and it's like you have to absolutely immerse and find that structure. Or in the case of Monk, playing like Bud Powell, which isn't bad. My God, Bud Powell, but it's not yet Monk. So, but
Right.
before you get to who Monk was all the time, before he discovered the whole tone scale or whatever it was he gravitates to, it was there all the time. But to let that come out in this organic way, you have to woodshed and you have to know the vocabulary, because I think that's the other thing with freedom. Whether it's Ornette Coleman, where you have the famous free jazz album or whatever, which you still have some kind of rhythmic structure, or even if you have a completely untethered free thing, there's still a vocabulary.
Yep.
There's still like a syntax that's partly dictated by the range of particular instruments and what you can physically do on them, or how long you can breathe or whatever. But there's again, vocabulary or syntax that you have to learn in order to be free.
That's right.
So interesting. And surely we can figure out a way to show how that's also Orthodox Christianity. It's probably there. It just needs.
I think it certainly is, because so okay, so one thing about Orthodoxy which is interesting is there are very specific statements about what the church is. The church is this, the church is that. It has these attributes. It has this, these components, apostolic succession. It has, there are very specific statements about what it is, but not about what it isn't. And that sort of, it creates this sort of, so, I frequently say, and I don't mean this in the new agey, my truth,
right,
kind of kind of thing, which is, oh my goodness,
relativism, right? Yeah.
But there is this, all truth is God's truth,
right?
Now again, that's not to create some sort of subjective category. We're actually talking about things that actually are true, things that actually correspond with reality, not things that are a figment of perception, but things that are actually are.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So
I'm with you.
We say true.
I'm with you. Yeah. Right. Mm-hmm.
But and so, and even looking at like Japanese culture with all of these sort of rituals, and you said that it's not religious at all. But I have this thought about ritual, like, it can't be spiritual without ritual. there must be a practice. There has to be a form.
Yeah.
And the more you know about what the form is, what the forms are, what the forms have been, the closer you can get to an expression of worship that will be unique because it's you doing it,
Mm-hmm.
but that will also correspond with the tradition, right? So it will connect those things. That seems to be the same struggle in jazz, right? So the reason it's hard to find your own voice is that, yeah, certainly if I was just wailing and screaming and doing all kind of weird abstract stuff, yeah, we could say, well, nobody's ever done that before.
Maybe there's a reason.
Right. Yeah, right. But nobody has done that exact squeaking pattern before, and then that's my voice. But what's more challenging is to say things that correspond with the language, with the cliches, with the tradition, but that also sounds like you.
Yep.
That's what's hard.
Right.
That is what's hard.
I when you very generously in the beginning asked me to speak about myself and my background. One thing I'd like to add is that I had the incredible fortune of having as one of my main sort of family and church figures, the great Father Alexander Schmemann, who was basically kind of an uncle figure to me. Now, for your viewers and listeners who don't know who he is, he's a really very influential person in kind of contemporary Orthodox Christianity. He died in 1983. I was 23 at that time. So from age 0 to 23, I knew him very well, and he was sort of a spiritual mentor, pastor to me. And I remember when he had already contracted cancer and was completely bald from chemotherapy and still full of joy, some of his last words to me ever were 2 words: be free. This is Father Alexander Schmemann, who is, if he had a specific kind of field that he wrote books about and taught, it was the field of liturgical theology. So he knew structure, he knew order. Yeah. He knew the shape of the liturgy. He knew every word of the liturgy, every gesture of the liturgy. And his last words to me were, be free. And so this comes together because he also knew that it's possible to become addicted to the form alone. It's possible to, like the word I used earlier, fetishize, or kind of, what's the word? Just fixate on the form and place all of your trust in that, and think that, if you've done every move correctly, you're in. Now do it with feeling.
The form is but the facilitator. It is only the facilitator. It's
yeah, it's profound.
That's heavy, man.
Right? Right?
Woo!
I know. What's beautiful about talking with you, and why I think we're going to talk a lot in the future, is that we understand each other on all these different places so easily, and that's just a great joy. It really is.
Yeah, it's
2 introverts geeking out about jazz and orthodoxy. Life could be worse. Right. Yeah.
I got to have you back. I'm going to have
Cool.
you back because
Cool.
as soon as I try to open this next can, you know, you can't get the worms back in the can,
I know.
and it'll be another hour and a half easily another hour and a half.
We'll do it with pleasure.
And man, I've enjoyed this. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a joy. How many people can I talk to like you? It's just a unique opportunity. It's a real joy. And I agree, there's plenty of places we can still go and spend a lot of time. So
we just got started. I mean, like we just started talking a second ago. So
well,
all right.
This whole COVID thing is breaking. We're going to be out of it soon, and you've got to come and speak to us at St. Vladimir's, and if you whistle down in Ohio, I'll come in a shot like I did last time. So we can do this in person as well. But in the meantime, we still have this the miracle of Zoom.
Yeah. I'm glad that things are starting to open up, and I definitely, if you call, I'm coming.
Great.
So
great.
That's how that will work.
Yeah.
All right. Well, God bless you, and Christ is risen.
Christ is risen. God bless you too. Indeed, He is risen. And
all right.
So the next time, don't make it long.
Definitely.
See you. Okay.
All right. Bye. I'll see you. Bye.